Today, we're diving into the crispy, layered world of Sfogliatelle. From medieval monasteries to bustling Neapolitan streets, join me as we take a bite into this iconic dessert. So I'm adding 2 1/3 cups of flour, 1/2 cup sugar, 3/4 cup semolina, half teaspoon of salt, and 1 cup of water. I'm going to mix that all together to form a dough. Now the lard is not going to be actually for the dough, but it's going to be to build the pastry. So I'm making this more modern recipe as sfogliatelle because I've always wanted to. I've always been a little intimidated of making it. It's my favorite pastry, and I've been told many times, don't even bother making it, just go out and buy it. Well, when I'm told I can't do something or shouldn't do something, that really makes me want to go out and do it. So I'm wrapping up this dough, and I'm going to let it rest for a minimum of an hour. If you look into the history of this pastry, you'll often stumble across the story of the cloistered nun in the convent of Santa Rosa in Conca dei Marini on the Amalfi coast. This occurred in the early 1600s, and the nun, by the name of Clotilde, had leftover semolina, decided to take a little ricotta cheese, dried fruit, and lemon liqueur, form it all into the shape of a monk's hood, throw it in the oven, bake it, and cover it with powdered sugar. And there, sfogliatelle were born. And in honor of the monastery in which they were originally created, the sfogliatella was originally called the Santa Rosa. Fast forward a couple hundred years, and a Napolitano baker by the name of Pasquale Pintaro acquired the recipe and started selling these pastries in his shop in 1818. This shop still exists and sells the pastries today, located at Via Toledo, 275 Naples. An interesting take on this story is that Pintaro didn't actually acquire this recipe, but rather it was stolen. That he had his daughter infiltrate the convent of nuns, acting as sort of a confectionery spy, so that she could steal this recipe for him. Regardless of that rumor, it does seem that the origin story of this pastry, with the nun in Santa Rosa, does seem to hold water. However, we can trace the origins back even further. Under Pope Pius V in 1570, there is a recipe written down by none other than Bartolomeo Scappi in the Opera dell'arte del cucinare. The title of this recipe? Well, Sfogliatelle piene di bianco mangiare. Sfogliatelle full of bianco mangiare. Bianco mangiare being a creamy almond pudding type dessert. This recipe being a flaky, layered pastry shaped into a shell, filled with ricotta cheese, egg, fruit, baked and covered with sugar, seems eerily similar to the sfogliatelle that we are familiar with today. And yes, there are obvious differences within this recipe. However, I do believe that the origin of sfogliatelle began with Bartolomeo Scappi, and that through the help of Clotilde and Pintaro, this recipe evolved into the pastry that we enjoy today. While the dough continues to rest, I'm going to start making the semolina portion of the filling. Starting off by adding 1/2 cup of water and 1/2 cup milk to a pot, bringing it up to a simmer. Once that simmers, I'm adding in 1/2 cup of sugar, stirring that in until it's dissolved, and then I'm going to add 2/3 cup of semolina. If you can't tell, I'm right-handed, and I have zero coordination with my left hand. Watch the temperature, you don't want to burn it. You want it to get thick and clumpy. Once it's thick enough, almost too thick to stir with the whisk, you want to take it out into a bowl. Now if you're like me, you can take it out with the whisk, but if you're smart, just use a wooden spoon. And now the time-consuming part, rolling the dough. So I'm going to take that large roll of dough that we had sitting, cut it into quarters, and I'm going to start working this out. Starting with the pasta machine at its thickest setting, I'm going to work it all the way down to its thinnest setting. Now some of you may find that using the second to thinnest setting will be a little bit better, keep it from breaking. The larger the countertop you have, the better, because this is going to need a lot of room. Once you get it laid out, Then you're going to want to spread lard all over it and try to get every little bit of that covered with lard. Not too thick, you don't want big clumps, so try and rub it in, but try not to rub too hard where it presses it into the countertop, then it's a pain. Then you're going to stretch it out, stretch and roll. And you want to get this stretched out as thin as possible without tearing. You should see the veins through your countertop. And don't worry if there are some small tears, just keep rolling, stretch and roll. That's all it takes.
Totally understand why people just buy these.
And those silly edges there that are kind of where my hands are rolling it, don't worry about those too much. You're going to be cutting those off. The main thing is if you're stretching it to about a foot in width, you want to keep rolling out that foot in width because that's what you're going to be using. And we're just going to repeat this process 3 more times. Once it's larded, we're going to stretch it and take the previous roll and add it to this one, making it just a little thicker each time. And you can cut those ends off if it becomes hard to work with, which is what I already did here. Then roll it in cellophane when you're all done and let it rest overnight, or at minimum 3 hours. Well, it's the next morning and I'm just brewing some coffee while making the filling for this breakfast. So to start off, I'm going to take that semolina mixture, throw it into a bowl, and really break that up well. It's probably in one large lump after being in the fridge overnight. Then we're going to add in the sugar, ricotta cheese, cinnamon, vanilla extract, the zest of a whole orange, and then the eggs. Adding in the eggs one at a time and mixing this up very well. And while editing this video, I see that this camera angle is just perfect for showing off that double chin. So taking out the dough, I'm going to cut these into 1/3 to 1/2 inch rounds. Look at all those beautiful layers that are in there. Then I'm going to take the palm of my hand and in a downward and outward motion, I'm going to just start pushing this out. This is the hardest part because if you do it too hard or mash it too much, you'll ruin all of those flaky layers. So if you look at the outside here, I kind of did that and you see it's all mashed into one. But for the most part, these came out pretty well. Gonna fill them with as much filling as you'd like. You don't have to have them all the way closed. I chose to, but really fill them up if you want. Bake them in the oven at 400 degrees for 30 minutes, and when they're done, don't forget to add the powdered sugar.
They're crispy, flaky. The filling is absolutely fantastic. That cinnamon, the orange zest, just everything plays so well together. By far, my favorite pastry. If you've never had one, you have to try these. Scale of 1 to 10, 9.5. I would say it would be a 10, but I haven't mastered it quite yet. They still could be better. But they're up there. Homemade, fantastic.